Urgent question, Mr Andrew Gwynn.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To ask the Prime Minister if she will make a statement on the operation of the Advisory Committee on Business Appointments and the Ministerial Code in light of the appointment of the Right Honourable Member for Tatton to the editorship of the London Evening Standard.
Minister Ben Gummer.
Mr Speaker, I am very grateful indeed to the Honourable Member for bringing this matter to the attention of the House. I shall take this opportunity to set out the Government's position. The Ministerial Code requires that former ministers must seek advice from the Independent Advisory Committee on Business Appointments about any appointments or employment they wish to take up within 2 years of leaving office. My right honourable friend, the member for Tatton, left his role in government in July last year. Information on advice given to him regarding previous appointments has been published on the committee's website. I understand that the application for this particular role mentioned by the honourable gentleman at the London Evening Standard was received by the committee on the 13th of March and is currently being considered. When the committee has fully considered this application, it will provide its advice directly to my right honourable friend, and this advice will be made public on the committee's website. Until this advice is made public, this is a confidential process between the committee and the right honourable member, although no doubt a matter of significant interest to this House.
Mr Andrew Gwynn.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I'd like to thank you firstly for granting this urgent question, and I will seek to adhere to your wish not to reference a particular honourable or right honourable member, but to address the underlying issue. Firstly, this is a matter of great concern, as we've seen in the media over the weekend. It was addressed to the Prime Minister, not with respect to the Minister, but I do appreciate his commitment to ensuring that more is done in future to prevent a repeat of the most recent incident. However, many on both sides of the House are likely to treat such comments with scepticism. The current rules around business appointments were established to counter suspicion that the decisions and statements of serving ministers might be influenced by the hope of future rewards in the form of a job offer or other monetary gains. Disregarding these rules deeply undermines public trust in the democratic process and the trust of the work of a Member of Parliament and in this House itself. It does a disservice to those members that respect the trust placed in them by their constituents, who spend every hour of their day fighting for their constituents' interests, and who ensure that proper attention to the representative role of an MP is given, as a vocation to public service should require. In 2012, an inquiry into ACOBA suggested that it should be replaced by a new Conflicts of Interest and Ethics Commissioner. But the government provided assurances that the current system and the ministerial code was robust enough to prevent behaviour or actions that may, at worst, bring this House into disrepute or further the tragic low standing this profession is sadly held in. Yet I'm forced here today to ask the government again how they will address another case and to give assurances that the current system has not provided yet another opportunity for a conflict of interest to be exploited. To hold one outside interest is perhaps defensible, but to hold several time-consuming outside commitments that have a deep overlap with the political role of what is supposed to be a full-time commitment as a member of this House is impossible to defend. Will the Minister confirm what action the government intends to take against ex-ministers who appear to be in breach of the ministerial code on their failure to seek advice from ACOBA before accepting an appointment? And will he consider his government's response to the 2012 review into ACOBA and provide a stronger system able to command the confidence of this House and the public, because it's what we deserve?
Minister.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman, and I have to say, I can see why he took this excuse to drag himself away from the shadow cabinet away day, which I can imagine why. I know he will be missing. I know he will be missing with every single cell in his body, and that is why I will give him a short answer so he can return as quickly as possible. As the honourable gentleman rightly said, much has already been done in this important area. The Prime Minister revised the Ministerial Code when she took office. It is a matter of high concern to her, and that is why, for the first time, the Ministerial Code appends to it the advice to ministers on leaving office about seeking the advice and assurances or approbation or indeed censure of ACABA, the Independent Advisory Committee on Business Appointments. But the important thing to say about that process is it is indeed independent. And I hope he will not mind, therefore, if I do not make any comment about this particular case, because they are considering it. And it would be wrong for me to prejudice their decision to say one way or another what my view was or what the government's view was. Not that we have a view until we have received the independent advice from the independent committee. But he makes a broader point about employment outside this House and about outside interests. And he will know that his colleagues and also members on this side of the House sitting in the Committee for Standards and Public Life will be looking at this matter again. It is a matter of ongoing concern to the public widely. It has been for many years. And it's something this House will have to grapple with in the years ahead. And that is why I welcome the committee looking at it again. And no doubt this will be something that will return to the House at a later point. But the honourable gentleman makes a wider point about vocation, and it is one I'd like to address directly. It is a very important matter. Members in this House, on both sides, no matter whether in opposition or on the government benches, in my experience, and I'm sure in his as well, come to this place, almost all of them, because they believe in public service. And that should inform their decisions, not just about their own interests, but about the wider interests of democracy and the representative system that we seek to represent. And I'm sure that all members, in the way that they deport themselves today in this discussion, will bear that in mind.
George Osborne.
Well, Mr. Speaker, when I heard that this urgent question had been granted, I thought it was important to be here, although unfortunately we have missed the deadline for the Evening Standard. In my view, Mr. Speaker, this Parliament is enhanced when we have people of different experience take part in our robust debate, and when people who have held senior ministerial office continue to contribute to the decisions we have to make. But I will listen to what my colleagues have to say in this debate. I'm interested to hear.
Minister.
Well, I'm not sure there's much more I should or could add to my right honourable friend's comments.
Roger Mullin.
Speaker, well, on International Happiness Day, we can see some people who are pretty happy. But it does strike me that we've heard it all when we get a minister standing up to give a response to a perfectly reasonable and sensible question and make a joke about it. And the honourable member for Tartan think it's a matter of mere amusement. Well, you cannot get off treating this House and the people as a load of gowks, as we would say in Scotland. This is a disgraceful shambles, and we need to know what this government is going to do about it.
Minister.
Well, this morning, as with all mornings, I have the pleasure of reading the First Minister's column in the Daily Record. And all I would say to the honourable gentleman is that there is a tradition in this House of contributing to newspapers. What it is important, and elsewhere, even in the Assembly in Holyrood, what it is important to remember in this is not, as the Speaker has said, the particulars, but in the generality of whether members should have interests or employment outside this House. And that is why I'm very glad that the committee is looking at it in detail, and no doubt members across the House will wish to consider their recommendations in due course.
Mrs. Gerald Gillan.
Mr. Speaker, I draw the House's attention to my register of members' interests, and the Minister will be aware that ACABA, which is an advisory non-departmental public body actually sponsored by the Cabinet Office, is within the remit of the Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Committee, of which I am a member, and the chairman is currently abroad with other members of the committee. PACAC actually has an inquiry into the role of ACABA, which is remaining open, and we have not yet reported. So our inquiry will take into account these new developments, and we are considering what further evidence to take. Would the Minister agree that it is important that the relevant committees of this House are able to carry out their remit in a properly constituted fashion and make recommendations based on evidence?
I completely agree with my right honourable friend, and she is right to remind the House that PACAC is undertaking an inquiry at the moment, and we will look with interest on the inquiry. My honourable friend, the Minister for the Constitution, has already contributed to that inquiry, and if required, will make further contributions should the inquiry wish.
Dame Rosie Winterton.
Could I return the Minister to the issue of the ministerial code and ask whether he thinks there is any need for reform of the code or for enforcement of the code? And if so, what would be the mechanism for doing that?
Minister.
The ministerial code determines how ministers should behave, and that is serving ministers. It doesn't have a direct impact on ex-ministers for reasons that she will understand. But what it does do is to advise ex-ministers about their responsibilities should they leave their position, and has been toughened up in that respect in the last few months before this current discussion happened. It is important that the committee, the advisory committee, gives its recommendations, I think, before we move on to broader matters of reform, because at the moment the questions that are being put are predicated on an answer that I would not like to predetermine.
Mr. Andrew Mitchell.
Mr. Speaker, I draw the House's attention to my entry in the Register of Members' Interests. In considering these matters, Mr. Speaker, is it not extremely important that the House always seeks to attract the widest possible cross-section, including retaining the services of those who have held high office? Is it not, Mr. Speaker, a matter of regret that for the first time, I think, in my 30 years on and off in this House, there is no former Prime Minister in either of the two Houses of Parliament?
But
Minister.
that is the view that this House has traditionally taken, and it is for this House, it is not a matter for the government on its own, it's for this House to make a decision in the long term about the balance it wishes to have. Traditionally, and to this point, this House has determined that it is right for members of Parliament to have the opportunity of having a wider hinterland. Now, that may change in the future. It is not for me to say at this point, but it is important that whatever we are discussing about the particularities at this juncture is judged within that context.
Mrs. Helen Goodman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 1523, Cardinal Wolsey became the Bishop of Durham. He never visited his diocese. What steps is the Minister going to take to make sure that honourable members don't start behaving like medieval clerics rather than modern politicians?
Minister.
Well, Thomas Wolsey was a proud boy of Ipswich and was proud to go back as often as he could. So I have no complaints about Thomas Wolsey. I can't speak for his constituents or his parishioners. What I can say is that it will be for all of our constituents in 2020 to judge the means and the manner in which we have discharged our responsibilities. And it is for us to go to the electorate at that point individually and to put ourselves up for re-election on that basis.
Sir Oliver Letwin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is my right honourable friend able to tell the House, is he aware of the Cabinet Office, that is, during the past 6 years up to July 16, receiving any representations from Her Majesty's opposition about the incompatibility of the role of Chancellor of the Exchequer with being a member of this House on the grounds it was too onerous a post to combine with that of being an MP?
Minister.
I endeavour in everything I do to be as assiduous as my predecessor in my ministerial responsibilities, but as yet I have not been able to uncover anything of the kind that he suggests.
Greg Mulholland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the context of potential overspending in key marginal seats and at the same time concerns about appointments of MPs in very safe seats, does this not show the stark difference between parties' and candidates' approach to marginal seats and safe seats, and show that there is a real problem of representation and an issue with first past the post as a system?
Well, this is a niche interest for the Liberal Democrats, all of whom have marginal seats, I know. But it is important to say, that what I do find extraordinary about that question is that there are members on both sides of this House who have very safe seats, who are incredibly assiduous in the way that they attend to their constituents. Members sitting opposite, that I'm looking at now, members behind me who have safe seats who are assiduous. And it is wrong to cast aspersions on them in the way they are going to start.
Mr. Michael Gove.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I commend the Minister for his judicious handling of this question? And can I also underline the importance to all of us for respecting constitutional principles? Is it not the case that ACOBA is an independent body and its independence needs to be respected? Is it not the case that we believe in a free press and therefore that proprietors should have the right to appoint who they believe is right to be editor without the executive or anyone else interfering in that decision? And is it not also the case that whoever represents a constituency should be up to its voters, not up to the opposition or anyone else to decree?
Well, my right honourable friend, as ever, is very good at making clear the liberties which underpin our democracy, and too often we forget.
David Winnick.
Those of us who were here at the time remember how difficult it was to restore the reputation of this House after the expensive scandal. And is there therefore not a wider issue here, the way in which the public look upon what they describe as the political class, and the feeling, justified or otherwise, we're all greedy, on the make, etc. We've got to be very careful we're not tarred with the same brush.
Well, the honourable gentleman was in this House, I imagine, when Dick Crossman went to edit the New Statesman, and that's when people read the New Statesman. And so I have to say that he will know of previous examples of where this has happened. What I do think is important is that we actually judge this situation in the context of whether we think that members of Parliament should have employment outside. There are arguments on both sides, and it's important that we don't reduce this to an ad hominem attack, and on which you would create very bad policy.
Anna Soubry.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, may I gently say to the honourable member for Denton and Redditch that it's never been suggested that during the 5 or 6 weeks that he was in Copeland as the Labour Party organiser for the campaign, nobody's ever suggested that he abandoned or did anything wrong by way of his constituents. Mr. Speaker, across this House, members of all parties work extremely hard, and especially when you have the ultimate second job as a minister, as a Secretary of State, as a Chancellor of the Exchequer, and of course as a Prime Minister. Would my right honourable friend agree with me that anybody who does any other work in addition to their duties as a Member of Parliament actually brings huge amounts of experience into this chamber that makes all of us actually represent everyone in this country even better? And would he also agree with me? Of course, the ultimate judge on this are our constituents, who at the ballot box can boot us out if they don't like what we do.
I thank my honourable friend, and she is right to say that ultimately the judge of our behaviour and performance would be our constituents. There are very strong arguments for allowing people to have outside interests. There are also strong arguments on the other way, but they are ones that need to be reconciled, I think, with more time and thought than would be deserved at an urgent question. But I repeat my earlier point that I really do believe that all of us have a duty not just to our own interests when we make these decisions, but actually to the wider reputation of our democracy. And we should we have that duty to make that decision in everything that we do, in whatever post we are holding in government or in Parliament.
Ms. Streeting.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At risk of upsetting the new editor of my city's newspaper, I think there is an air of complete unreality around some of the exchanges here this afternoon. The trust of the public in both politicians and the media has never been so low. So what does it do to the trust of the public in politicians with the idea that people could have a number of roles, including editing a newspaper? What does it do for the reputation of media in an era of fake news to have someone editing a newspaper who has no qualification to do so? And in relation, and I'd ask the Minister, I would just ask this question of the Minister. In relation to the question of the Honourable Member for Hull North about apprenticeship funding, I know as a London MP that I want apprenticeship funding in London, and so would the editor of my local newspaper. But what would the Right Honourable Member for Tatham think?
We can't ask ministers to speculate about what individual honourable or right honourable members might think.
Right there, that's the conflict.
Whatever the conflict may be, I'm the determinant of what is an orderly question. And I would ask the honourable gentleman graciously to accept that I'm trying to do the right thing in balancing different considerations, but we must adhere to order. The minister's a dexterous fellow and he'll answer in a way that is orderly, and I know he will not answer in a way that isn't. Venga.
I thank the honourable gentleman, and he is incisive in how he asks his question, and I agree with him that we have obviously a challenge, all of us, in raising the reputation of our democratic institutions and the people that serve in them. That would not be served by a Minister of the Crown coming to the dispatch box on a Monday after an announcement on the Friday to give a new policy announcement just to suit the particular agenda of the day. It is a matter for the House to come to a wide consideration of whether they think it is right or wrong for people to have outside interests. I think there are arguments on both sides. And in the meantime, all of us need to consider, I think, our individual duties to the wider body politic in the way that we behave.
Sir Desmond Sway.
But he has a justified reputation for his devotion and assiduous work that he does on his ministerial duties. Has it diminished in any way his ability to serve his constituents?
It is not, in any way at all.
Ian C. Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Minister please refer to the advisory committee the dilemma that exists when a former minister is given a particular appointment on the basis of his geographical location, but then subsequently secures a further appointment which flatly contradicts the interest that he was meant to serve for that previous appointment? Can a London Standard editor look after the Northern Powerhouse?
I'll say to the honourable gentleman that is not for me to make that determination. It's for the Independent Advisory Committee, and they will make a recommendation to my right honourable friend. And I know he wants me to say something controversial, but it would be wrong to undermine the process which is going through at the moment in the committee, and it would be wrong for me to prejudice their decision by saying one thing or the other.
Tom Tugendhat.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many people in this House have second jobs. Yourself, Mr. Speaker, your second job obviously is Speaker of this House, and you do it assiduously while able to serve your constituents. Could the Minister please help me to understand which jobs would be considered acceptable by the government or by another statutory body? Because many people write books, own land, own property. Should they therefore sell into monastic simplicity? Should they therefore sell everything into monastic simplicity and become a political class? Or should they represent the economy and the people of this country by maintaining an intact body of effort with other people?
Minister.
Well, I congratulate...
Order. We must have a fair hearing to members on both sides and to the Minister. Earlier, members were moaning that the Minister needed to speak up a bit. Well, that's as may be, but the Minister is immensely courteous. And just as the Minister's courteous to the House should be courteous to the Minister. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My congratulations to my honourable friend for moving himself up the speaking order at the next debate.